Hi, my name is Grace Nye, and today we're going to be talking about Florida and its coral reefs, more specifically about my experience on the marine field ecology trip to Florida Keys and scuba diving along the barrier reefs.
So first off, a brief outline
Of what we're going to be covering before we dive in. So we're going to be talking about the three main habitats of the Florida Keys related to the coral reefs. That's the mangroves, the seagrass, and the coral reefs themselves. We're going to be talking about my experience, perspective, and connection with each of these three habitats. And we're going to close out with a comparison of my experience with that of my teammates. So first off, let's go over a brief introduction to the Florida Keys themselves. So the Florida Keys are a string of islands which extends from the tip of Florida. It's all connected by one long highway. And these islands were all formed from limestone. And as you can see, if you were taking a boat leaving one of the islands, the walls on the sides of the canal are all stone. And so you can see that these are made of limestone. We started the week up at the top of the Keys in Key Largo, and towards the end of the week moved down towards Big Pine Key. And so we got to see a pretty good spread of these keys and what they looked like, which is very exciting. So the three main habitats in the Florida Keys having to do with the coral reefs are the mangroves, the seagrasses, and the coral reefs. And we're going to go over each one of these in more detail. So first off, the mangroves are very important for coral reef habitat. Let's talk about why. So there's three types. There's the red mangroves, which grow along the shoreline, and they are submerged in the water, and their prop roots really allow them to be submerged here and hold them up above the water. And then there's the black mangroves that grow in the intertidal zone, and these have pneumatophores or snorkel roots that poke out above the water and allow them to get some of that air. And then we have the white mangroves, which grow above the tidal zone, and these have roots that more closely resemble your typical tree. So these trees are pretty important because they are nursery habitats for many young fishes before they mature and head out to the coral reefs. They help to filter out nutrients. So there's a stream of water that's flowing down Florida from the Everglades, and it flows out into the ocean. And this water has a lot of nutrients in it. And so the mangroves do a really big job to get rid of some of the nutrients from this water before it hits the coral reefs, because coral reefs need to have low nutrient water. Something we'll talk about a bit later on. Finally, they help to maintain the sedimentation. So if there's tidal waves that crash into these trees, they really do a lot to settle the disturbances of the water, and they keep the sedimentation low. And this is important for our next habitat, which is the seagrasses. So there's three main types of seagrasses in Florida. There's turtle grass, the shoal grass, and the manatee grass. And these need to grow in a place where they have access to sunlight. So they usually only grow in shallow water, and they only grow in water that has low sedimentation. So in this case, the mangroves are really important. And the seagrasses are also pretty important because they are also a nursery habitat for many young fishes before they head out into the coral reefs, and they help to settle the flow of the water over the seabed, and so that larvae can settle there and grow. So these are also very important. So the coral reefs, which are in some ways the star of the show, but are truly interconnected with the mangroves and the seagrasses, are animals which have many polyps on them, and they live in a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae, which is a type of algae which grows underneath their skin. And the zooxanthellae perform photosynthesis, and so they produce energy and share this with the coral reefs, and so they live in this symbiotic relationship, which is really cool. So there's three different types of coral. There's hard coral or stony coral, and some examples of this are brain coral and elkhorn coral, as shown here. And these stony coral just have a calcium carbonate skeleton on the outside, which gives them their structure and makes them hard. Then we have soft coral, such as this sea fan coral, and this is made of a more flexible protein. And then we have a fire coral, which can look like this, and these have stinging nematocysts, so these can hurt, and make sure you don't touch them. Now, coral reproduce in some very interesting ways. They have simultaneous mass spawning, where they will all simultaneously release their gametes into the water. They also reproduce through fragmentation. So if you break off a fragment of a coral and plant it somewhere else, it will grow into a whole new animal, which is very cool. They are the largest living ecosystem on Earth. They support a very high percentage of fish on the ocean and give them a home. So they are very important for fish and for some of our economy, which depends on fish, depends on the coral reefs. People who depend on fish for food depend on the coral reefs. But they require very specific conditions. So they require a specific temperature, they require a specific amount of nutrients in the water. As I mentioned earlier, they need a low amount of nutrients because otherwise the algae will outcompete them. They need to have a specific, like, low turbidity so that they can have access to the sunlight so that the algae can complete photosynthesis. But there's a lot of different threats to the coral right now. So there's human threats from boats, from divers physically hitting them. There's threats from climate change. The water is warming. It's causing mass coral bleaching events. There's stony coral tissue disease is raging and it's killing off many of the stony coral up in the Florida Keys, which is very, very sad. There's many other different threats to the coral right now. So they are under a very high threat of extinction. So moving on to my experience with each of these different habitats. So I really enjoyed my experience among the mangroves and the seagrass. I really felt like it caused me to slow down and be mindful of the little details. So when we were examining the different leaves of the different mangrove trees, I really appreciated that because it forced me to pay attention to really tiny details and really look at simple things, but these little simple details ended up meaning a lot for the function of the leaves, such as the salt on the outside of the red mangrove leaves. And also, when you were snorkeling among the seagrasses and the roots, you had to really slow down and practice looking very carefully for very tiny things along the seabed so you could see all the tiny little creatures that were growing there. And so I really appreciated this because I felt that it made me more mindful and more appreciative of tinier things. And also it helped me to be aware of human damage, which is often done through ignorance because we don't take the time to slow down and be mindful of some of the little things. And so because of that, we can end up actually damaging some really important habitats. So next, my experience with the coral reefs was really just amazing. It was really just beautiful. I was really overwhelmed with the colors and all of the fish that we saw. I really enjoyed witnessing the different ecological communities there, all of the neighborhoods of fish that we saw. I was so excited to see this spotted eagle ray, the green moray eels, the couple of sharks that we saw. I was just really filled with excitement, and a lot of really great positive emotions came from this. But there were also some sad emotions because we also passed over some coral graveyards and some stony coral that had suffered losses from stony coral tissue disease, and some reefs like Pickles Reefs, which had really been decimated by a lot of different things. And so this made me honestly pretty scared because it really brought home to me the reality of climate change in a way that I haven't really experienced with my own eyes. before. So I thought this was a very meaningful experience for me. And I really appreciated especially the ability to visit Moat Laboratory and the Coral Restoration Foundation and be able to see some of the coral restoration projects that are currently under work. So here you can see we're helping Moat Laboratory clean up their coral and CRF clean off the coral in their coral nurseries. And these efforts to protect coral from things like stony coral tissue disease and from the bleaching events are, I think, really important and really hopeful, and they do give me a lot of hope. So I really appreciated this. So finally, we'll go over a little comparison of my experience to those of the other students. Now, I really think that most of us in the group did have very similar reactions to what we saw. We loved the beauty of it. We loved the coral. We loved the wildlife. I think most of us were very excited to see the new animals. I think this flamingo-tongued snail here really kind of symbolizes. I think we built a good connection among us in the group where we all really bonded over the beauty of the things that we saw and the experiences that we had. We were all very excited to discover this flamingo-tongued snail on this sea fan. But I do think that one difference in the way that we approached it may have been in the spiritual connection, which we all shared with the nature. So I am not a religious person, and so my approach to it was not from a religious perspective, but from a perspective of awe at how evolution and the course of evolution over so many billions of years has led to such beautiful things being able to exist, and this horror at the fact that all of these billions of years of evolution are being like destroyed in a very harmful way by human influence on the planet. And some of my fellow classmates approached it from a bit of a religious perspective, where they were looking at awe and wonder at creation that has been ordered and that we should be respectful of and be protectful of. And I think that both of these approaches are very important, and both of them are very beautiful, very good, and I really respect both approaches, and I think that honestly we should all be working together, because ultimately we've come to the same place, which is that nature is beautiful and we should be protecting it and we should be respecting it. So in conclusion, we saw three of the main habitats in the Florida Keys: the mangroves, the seagrass, and the coral reefs. And my experience with each one of them was really of appreciation and awe for the beauty and the community of nature. And I also experienced fear at the extinction threat that's facing these coral reefs, but also some hope, because there is good work being done right now to protect them. And I really think that this represented a shared spiritual experience for me and for the other classmates as we went into this trip to the Florida Keys. So thank you so much for watching, and I'm glad that you gave me the time. Thank you.